My name is Ethan Graves. I'm 36 years old. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, and for a long time I thought life was all about resistance. I resisted the tiredness. I resisted the silent humiliations. I resisted the invisible weight that accumulated every day on my back. I worked for almost 10 years as an inventory supervisor at a logistics company called Crossfield Dynamics, one of those discrete giants that move the country from within impersonal warehouses and endless corridors. But what happened that Monday morning changed everything. Not just the direction of my job, but the direction of who I believed I was. It was a sharp punch in the chest, but the curious thing is that the person who reached out to me in that darkest moment was not a colleague, manager, or childhood friend. It was the janitor. A silent, almost invisible man who handed over the key to something I never knew was locked. I woke up to the sound of rain hitting the living room window awning. That was unusual around here. The northern Arizona desert rarely cried from the sky, so when it rained, it seemed like a sign. The clock said 6:12 a.m., and my body was more tired than when I went to sleep. I put on my usual shirt, which was already a little frayed at the collar, drank a very weak coffee, and left without saying anything to anyone. My apartment was small, silent, and maybe I used to be like that too. I arrived at the Crossfield Distribution Center at 7:28 a.m., 2 minutes earlier than usual. The hallways felt even colder that morning. There was a strange buzz between shifts, as if someone had let loose a secret in the locker room, and it was spreading, changing shape, growing. At 8 a.m. sharp, an announcement over the loudspeakers. All employees on the administrative shift must go to room 4A for an extraordinary meeting. That chilled my spine. We had never been called so directly. I picked up my clipboard almost by instinct and walked over there. Room 4A was large, white walls and windowless, with chairs lined up in silence. The air conditioning blew harder than necessary, as if the environment wanted to keep us awake and alert. When everyone was seated, Mr. Kessler entered. Tall, clean-shaven, shoes so shiny they reflected the white light from the ceiling. Beside him was a woman in a gray blazer holding a black folder, someone from HR I had never seen before. He didn't mess around. I drove for over 40 minutes, not really knowing what to expect. The address led to a part of the city I rarely visited, an older, almost forgotten area where the electrical wires still hung too low and the warehouses had the same dull color of the times. The rain had eased, but the sky remained overcast, as if hesitating between giving up and continuing to cry. I arrived at that road pine, a narrow alley lined with crooked trees and worn wooden fences. At the end of the street, a rusty iron gate with the letters almost faded, Shed 3, Backside Gate. I parked and walked there. The key felt heavier now, as if it were loaded with unanswered questions. I placed it in the lock, and with a long, reluctant creak, the lock turned. Behind the door, a small, silent warehouse. But as soon as I entered, something inside me woke up. Natural light entered through tall windows, covered by thin beige fabric curtains. The smell was a mixture of old wood, dry paint, and memories. A memory of something I hadn't experienced in years, maybe decades. On the walls, shelves full of bottles with brushes, charcoal, paints, pieces of frames. An easel covered with a white cloth was in the center of the space, as if it had been waiting for someone for a long time. I sat on a bench next to the wooden bench. On top of it, a box of artistic tools, a pad of white sheets of paper, some already yellowed at the edges, and an envelope with my name, written in careful letters. Ethan. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter. Ethan, when I saw you organizing boxes on the night shift, I saw something familiar in your eyes. The same thing that Lorraine had when she spent years locking her soul in a job that didn't recognize her. She, my wife, painted in secret out of shame, out of fear. He only truly flourished when he understood that art is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And you have that too, even if you forgot. This place was hers. Now it's yours. Not out of charity, for merit. Use however you want, transform it, or just sit and breathe. Lionel. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. That hit me harder than the dismissal at the company. What Lionel had just given me wasn't just a physical space. It was a new beginning, a permission, a second chance to remember who I was before the stock uniform, before the reports, before the silence that dominated me. Slowly, I removed the cloth covering the easel. Below, a blank screen. I almost smiled. So many years seeking stability, accepting small crumbs of respect, living a routine programmed to the millimeter. And there I was, faced with something that no one expected from me, not even me. I opened the leather case I had brought from Crossfield. The pencils were still there, although a little worn. I took the sharpest one, placed the sheet on the table, and breathed. My hand hesitated at first, but then, almost as if guided by another memory, it began to trace lines. Crooked lines, yes. Hesitant, perhaps, but they were mine. I drew for hours, without noticing the time passing. An empty park bench, an umbrella abandoned on the sidewalk, a woman with tired eyes sitting on the subway. Fragments of the world that I have always seen but never recorded. Each stroke eased the weight in my chest. It was as if, with each scribble, I erased some of the dust that had accumulated in my soul. Late that afternoon, the sky opened for the first time. Golden rays passed through the glass and illuminated the makeshift studio. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel rushed. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't worry about returning emails or loading and unloading times. I just existed there, and that was enough. I returned home that afternoon differently. There was something light in the air. The traffic seemed less aggressive, the city less gray. I slept soundly that night, without dreams or interruptions. And the next day, I returned to Shed 3, as if it were my starting and ending point. I started going to the space every day. I still didn't know what I would do with it. If I would go back to work somewhere else, if I would open a business, if I would seek stability again. But one thing was certain. I was no longer the same man who left Crossfield Dynamics. Lionel appeared 3 days later. He had a thermos of coffee and 2 donuts in a paper bag. He sat on the next bench and remained silent, observing my new work. "You saw things again?" he said without taking his eyes off the screen. "I think so," I replied, surprised by my own voice. Lorraine said that when we stop seeing, the soul falls asleep. I didn't know how to respond. I just kept drawing, and Lionel stood there, quietly, carefully drinking coffee. His presence was a serene anchor. He didn't need to tell me what to do or motivate me with stock phrases. Just the fact that he was there was enough. That afternoon, before leaving, he turned to me and said, "Ethan, everyone has something that saves them. It could be music. It could be a garden in the backyard. It could be an old dog. Yours is the drawing. Don't miss it again." I promised I wouldn't lose. And from that moment on, I started to discover how to transform it into something more than just a refuge. I woke up early the next day before the alarm even went off. There was something different inside me, as if an old engine had started up again, still creaking but steady. I made myself some strong coffee, put on a clean shirt, and headed back to the warehouse on Road Pine. It was no longer just a strange space with the smell of paint and memories. It was the only place where I felt whole. That morning, I decided to organize things better. Lionel had left the studio exactly as Lorraine had used it. I respected every corner, every paint stain on the floor, but little by little I started to add my touch. I found an old radio on one of the shelves, and after a few tries, it came back to life. The music filled the space with lightness. I put the sheets in order, sharpened my pencils, cleaned the forgotten brushes. It was like caring for a relic that was also home. When I finished, I sat down in front of the canvas and started a new drawing. This time, Lionel was my model. I didn't pose formally, of course. I drew it from memory. The way he walked pushing the cleaning cart, his deep but attentive eyes, and the shy smile he almost always wore. Each stroke felt like a conversation with time, with lost time, with time rediscovered. Halfway through the day, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Out of instinct, I almost ignored it, but I answered. "Mr. Graves, this is Mandy Rojas from Brightview Consulting. I understand that you are no longer with Crossfield, and I would like to know if you are open to opportunities." I had to swallow hard before responding. For years, I've wanted a connection like this, to get noticed by other companies, maybe even move up. But now, with a pencil in my hand and charcoal under my fingernails, the question sounded strange. Thank you for contacting us, Mandy. But right now, I'm focused on another project. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Right. If you change your mind, we are at your disposal. Good luck. I hung up. For the first time, I turned down a chance to grow up, as my company colleagues said. But that wasn't growth. It was repetition. A cycle of tiredness, fixed salary and dreams in installments. And I was out of it. Over the next few days, I continued drawing. I started posting some old and new drafts on my personal profile on a social network I barely used. I posted without expectations, just as a way to archive what I was creating. I didn't think people would notice. But they noticed. First came 2 comments from old schoolmates, then an acquaintance from a summer course I took years ago, then a private message. Do you do it to order? I wanted an illustration of my dog to give my wife a gift. I was surprised. I thought about saying no, that I wasn't professional, that I didn't sell. But I typed, yes, of course, and hit send before insecurity sabotaged me. I spent 2 days working on that illustration. The dog was an elderly Labrador, with one eye darker than the other and hair that was thinner. I studied the reference like a surgeon looks at an X-ray. When I emailed the high-resolution results, I received a response in less than 2 hours. It's wonderful. She cried. We paid for the transfer right away. Thank you. It was just a drawing, but it made me tremble like a museum exhibit. Someone had seen value in something that left my hands. It shook me. Over time, more orders began to arrive. Small, humble, a family portrait, a landscape of a client's childhood home, a cover for a retired teacher's e-book. Each job demanded me, pulled me into the world again, but in a softer, more truthful way. Lionel started to visit the warehouse more frequently. He brought old newspapers, homemade cornbread, or just his serene presence. One day he showed up with a package wrapped in craft paper. It was Lorraine's, he said. We found it after she left, but never knew what to do with it. I think now you will know. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a set of dry pastels in soft tones, stored in a hand-carved wooden box. At the bottom of the lid, a small engraved signature, LR to always create. My eyes filled up. I touched the edges of the pastries as if they were sacred relics. She saved that for the right moment, Lionel murmured. Maybe that time is now. I hugged that man, for the first time. A long, silent hug. He didn't say anything. He just patted my back twice and walked away as always, slowly, without rushing to go, but with the lightness of someone who already knows the way. That night I stayed in the studio until late. The world outside went dark, and the warehouse remained lit inside, lit by me, by Lorraine, by Lionel, for the memories that weren't mine, but that now belonged to me. The next morning, I opened a professional social media account. I chose the name Graves Studio. Nothing grand, nothing flashy. Just my name and the idea of a place where stories take shape with lines and paint. The first post was an image of the easel with the light coming in through the windows, accompanied by the caption, "Everyone has a place where they can breathe again. This is mine. Chi Art, Chuck Renaissance." In less than an hour, more than 100 people liked it. And among the comments, one made me stop. I recognized you, Ethan. You worked with me at Crossfield. I never imagined this from you. How brave. Thanks for sharing. Courage, a word I never associated with myself. But there, in that silent warehouse, something had really changed. And now it was just the beginning. The warehouse, previously silent like a secret shelter, began to breathe with me. Every time I opened the door, I felt like I was coming home. Drawings are no longer just practice or catharsis. They began to carry stories, identities, small fragments of lives that were now connected to mine. Ethan Graves, the invisible inventory supervisor, was becoming someone who created visual memories for strangers. And that was powerful. Over time, orders increased. The Graves Studio profile gained consistent followers, and the messages that arrived were not just from customers. They were from people touched by the stories behind the drawings. This portrait reminded me of my father. I never thought I would see my childhood home like this. You captured something I didn't even know I was looking for. And so, art stopped being a simple escape. It became a bridge. One day, I received a different message. It was from a woman named Veronica Stiles. His tone was formal, but there was something gentle in the words. "Hi, Ethan. I'm a volunteer curator at a small community gallery in Sedona. I saw your work through a friend who bought a portrait of you. We're opening a New Beginnings-themed exhibit. We'd like to include some of your work, if you're interested." At the time, I thought about refusing. I still felt small, a beginner, improvised. But the word New Beginnings stuck in my head like a seed wanting to sprout. I was a fresh start. My story, my art, my steps. Everything there was born from a point where the ground had disappeared, and still, I had continued walking. I responded with a restrained yes, trying to hide my nervousness. Veronica thanked him and asked for 5 works to exhibit. "The style is yours, the choice is yours, but that they have soul, that's what matters." And I knew what a soul I had now, after being silent for so long. I separated 3 old drawings born in the first days of the warehouse, when I was still relearning how to hold a pencil firmly. The other 2 I decided to create from scratch. One of them would be about Lionel, but not him cleaning floors. It would be Lionel on the porch of a house I've never seen, with a steaming mug in his hands, observing the world with those eyes that see beyond. The other one I still didn't know, but it would come. I went to the gallery in Sedona in person. Veronica was a woman with short, curly hair, a welcoming laugh, and eyes that seemed to hear everything. She welcomed me with a hug and a strong coffee. "Your work has silence," she said, looking at one of the pieces. "And that's rare. People shout too much, even in art." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. Over the next few days, I prepared the paintings with simple frames, stamped my name on the back, and got them ready for the show. On opening night, I wore my best shirt, even though it still smelled a little like turpentine. The gallery was small, cozy, with exposed brick walls and warm lighting. My paintings were there, side by side with other works by beginning and veteran artists. A song of new beginnings, as if each painting said, "I survived." Many people passed by there. Some looked and followed. Others stopped and remained silent for long minutes. A man wearing a hat stopped in front of Lionel's painting and, after a few seconds, took off his glasses to wipe his eyes. It was like that. Small encounters between what I created and what others carried. At the end of the night, Veronica took me aside. "Ethan, you should think about giving workshops here. People need more than seeing art. They need to make art. And you have this in you, this way of teaching without teaching." I was surprised. To teach? I still saw myself as someone trying to find their own way, stumbling between coal and paper. But the idea stayed there, throbbing like something possible. I returned to the warehouse late at night, exhausted but at peace. I turned on the light, left the folder with the materials in the corner, and stood there looking at the empty easel. That was where it all started. A place where I found myself, trait by trait. The next day, Lionel showed up early, holding a wooden box with crooked hinges. "I brought something else from Lorraine," he said. I thought it was time to deliver. Inside, there were newspaper clippings with old exhibitions, handwritten letters from her to other artists in the city, and a sketchbook with notes and thoughts about creating, living, failing, and trying again. It was like reading a secret, intimate diary, as if Lorraine was telling me the secrets she learned before she left. I leafed through it for hours. On one of the pages, she had written something I will never forget. "Even when no one sees it, art is a cry against silence." I closed the notebook reverently. That wasn't just inheritance. It was a calling. That same week, I prepared a simple ad and posted it on social media. "Drawing Workshop with Ethan Graves. For those who have never drawn, for those who have stopped drawing, for those who need to find themselves again. In Shed 3, limited spaces. Free entry. I didn't wait long. I didn't spend on advertising. I just published it. And in less than 2 days, the messages started arriving. On the afternoon of the workshop's first Saturday, the sun shed golden light through the warehouse's tall windows. I arranged the space with the same care that my mother used to set the table on Sunday mornings. Not out of formality, but out of respect for whoever was coming. I organized the benches in a circle, leaving papers, pencils, and charcoal distributed delicately. The main easel remained empty, as if it too was waiting for someone. The first to arrive was a lady in her late 70s called Martha. She walked in slowly, leaning on an ornate cane, and smiled when she saw the materials. Soon after, 2 teenage sisters arrived, a shy boy in a loose t-shirt, a woman with distracted eyes and restless fingers, and a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he had come straight from an office. In total, there were 9 of us, including me. I didn't start with technique. I started with silence. I asked everyone to close their eyes for a minute and breathe. Then they could draw a memory without worrying about whether it was right. The sound of the graphite on the paper was like music. People allowing themselves, even without knowing it. When we opened our eyes and shared the doodles, I didn't see perfection. I saw courage. The workshop became routine. Every Saturday, new faces appeared. Some came once and disappeared. Others stayed, came back, brought friends. The warehouse began to take on a different vibe. Laughter, stories, questions, comfortable silence. Each wall began to carry drawings stuck with tape, handwritten notes, and loose sentences. The studio was now plural, and it was in this new flow of life that I met Sam. He appeared in the 3rd workshop. He was about 45 years old, with an unshaven beard and the eyes of someone who has seen a lot and never said half of it. He stayed at the back of the room, drew little, but stayed until the end. At the end, before leaving, he came to me. Drawing, "I never thought it would be like that," he said, showing the paper with crooked lines and an ill-defined figure that, according to him, was his deceased dog. "Like what?" I asked. "Like breathing with your hand." That stayed with me. Breathe with your hand. That was exactly it. Sam returned the following week, and in the other. One day he arrived early and brought coffee for everyone. We started talking about life outside of there. He said that he had been a truck driver for 20 years and that, after an accident, he gave up everything. I didn't work. I didn't sleep properly. But there, in Shed 3, he began to feel like someone again. It was these stories that fed me. Money was still little. Orders came in slowly. But there was life. So many lives mixing with mine, supporting each other in that space of paper and coal. One day, Lionel appeared with a small photo frame in his hands. "I thought this painting should be here," he said. It was a photo of Lorraine, much younger than I imagined. She was smiling with her hands covered in paint, her hair tied up in any way, and behind her the easel, the same easel that now supported the creations of dozens of other people. I placed the photo on the main shelf, among the jars of brushes and drawing books. I made a little note in cursive at the bottom. Here began something that never ended. At night, I sat on the bench closest to the window and watched the dark street. I was tired, but it was a different kind of tiredness, one that came after something good, the kind of tiredness that leaves the heart calm. I took out my sketchbook and doodled the silhouettes of everyone who came through the workshop that month. Small faces, gestures, details, each one left a mark, and that transformed me. A week later, something unexpected happened. I received a message from a local journalist named Aiden. "Hi, Ethan. I'm a culture columnist at Flagstaff Today. Someone told me about your workshop in Shed 3. I was curious. Can I come by and do a story?" I thought a lot before responding. I was afraid of exposure, fear that all that would become a product. But I also understood that sharing could inspire others. I said yes. Aiden came on a Friday afternoon. He sat, observed, took discreet notes. He talked to Martha, to Sam, to his teenage sisters who now even brought snacks to share. In the end, he interviewed me with a small recorder, asked about my dismissal, about Lionel, about Lorraine, about art as redemption. I spoke as I spoke in the workshops. Simply. A week later, the article came out. The title surprised me. The Studio That Resurrects People, The Art of Ethan Graves and the Miracle of Shed 3. The impact was greater than I expected. In a few days, the number of followers on the profile doubled. Orders increased. The workshops were packed. People who I never imagined would hear my name now wanted to see the space, participate, draw. But along with that came the doubt. What now? To grow, expand, hire, monetize? I talked to Lionel about this as we drank tea in silence. What if this all gets out of control? I asked. Control is an illusion, Ethan. But the intention, you hold tight. Don't let the noise erase the reason you started. I thought about it the rest of the night, and I realized that my fear was not growth. It was losing the heart of the thing, losing what Lorraine planted, what Lionel handed me, what I, without knowing it, was building. So I decided to grow, but with roots. I took the workshop to other places, community centers, schools, even a nursing home. But Shed 3 remained the core, the heart, the place where it all began, and most importantly, the place where I finally started living. It didn't take long for Shed 3 to become more than a studio. It became a kind of extended home, a place where people of all ages and backgrounds felt safe to be who they were, or to discover who they could still be. Sometimes I felt like a caretaker of souls, someone who just kept the space clean enough for others to flourish. And that, for me, was enough. Orders began to accumulate on a small waiting list. Portraits, pictures for wedding gifts, illustrations of children's stories. I started using part of my earnings to buy more materials, invest in better quality paper, new brushes, even a heater for the cold months that were approaching. I also paid Lionel, against his will, to help with the car repairs. Consider it part of Lorraine's heritage, I said. He pretended to complain, but smiled with his eyes. One day, I received a message that paralyzed me for a few minutes. It was from my sister, Madison. We had grown apart after life threw us in different directions. She built a career in the legal sector in Denver, and well, for a long time, I was just the brother who took care of inventory and didn't care much about the future. The message was simple. I saw your name in an article. I need to talk. I called the same day, at night. His voice came excitedly from the other end of the line. Ethan, I didn't know. I had no idea you were carrying all this. We talked for over an hour. She told me that she had read the article, visited my networks, seen the drawings, the reports from the workshops. He said he cried when he read the section about Lionel and Lorraine. He asked if he could visit. You always could, Maddie, I said. He always could. She came 2 weeks later, on a clear Saturday. When he entered Shed 3, his eyes swept around the room as if he were searching for something he had lost. This thing has soul, he said, touching one of the hanging frames with his fingers. It looks like a grandma's house and a cathedral at the same time. I showed the materials, the works, Lorraine's corner. She was especially moved by the drawings pasted on the wall, made by children from the public school in the region where I took an illustration workshop. He said the world needed more of this, and less of courts. After she left, I received another message from her. This time, more personal. Thanks, bro. You reminded me that we can still reinvent ourselves. That was the word that began to define everything. Reinvention. Not a forced change, imposed by deadlines or necessity, but an organic transformation, which comes from within, when what was stifled is allowed to find air to breathe. One cold December morning, Lionel called me. It was rare for him to do this. His voice was hoarser than normal. Ethan, I wanted to ask you something. Of course. Anything. Remember Lorraine's room back at our house? I remember, yes. She left a locked cabinet there. I never had the courage to move, but I think now is the time, and I wish you were the one to open it. That left me speechless for a few seconds. He is sure? No, but courage is never certain. It's just a decision. The next day, I went to Lionel's house. It's in a quiet neighborhood with trees that look older than the city. He greeted me with hot coffee and shaking hands. Lorraine's room was small, with lavender walls and hand-embroidered curtains. Nothing had been touched. An old easel in the corner, a shelf with art books, a trunk on the floor. And there, the closet. Tall, dark wood with a faded gold lock. Lionel handed me the key. It was similar to the one he gave me months ago, perhaps from the same time. I put it in the lock and turned it slowly. A click, then a creak, and the closet opened. Inside were dozens of sketchbooks, unfinished canvases, never-sent letters, and a smaller box with my name written in blue ink. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside there was a drawing, a portrait of me as a young man from when I worked at Crossfield. Lorraine had drawn me. On the other side of the sheet, a note. He has the eyes of a hidden artist. One day he will find the right light. I hope Lionel sees what I saw. My eyes burned. I sat on the floor and took a deep breath. Lorraine saw me before I even knew who it was. She saw beyond the routine, beyond the pain, beyond the stillness. I returned home with the drawing wrapped in tissue paper. I hung it in Shed 3, above the materials rack, as a symbol of everything that came before me. Lionel cried when he saw it. "She already knew you," he said, "even without knowing you." That night I drew like I had never drawn before. Each stroke a prayer, every shadow a piece of gratitude. Shed 3 was now a sanctuary, and I, a guardian. Winter arrived with its silences and its biting winds. Snow in Flagstaff wasn't unusual, but this year it seemed to remind the city of everything it had buried. The trees lost their leaves more quickly, the streets became quieter, and Shed 3, now heated by an old gas heater, became even more of a refuge. I continued with the workshops, now in smaller groups due to the cold. Still, no one gave up. Sam, the former truck driver, started to help me with the organization, offering coffee and helping the shy ones to loosen up. Martha, despite her age and her cane, remained firm, her drawings becoming more and more delicate. Even Lionel showed up to one of the classes, sat in silence, and drew his own house from above, as if he wanted to see life from a new angle. It was on one of those Saturdays when the snow was softly tapping against the warehouse's windows that I received a different order. A young woman named Alyssa sent me a short message. "Hi, Ethan. I don't know if you do this kind of work, but I'd like a drawing of my brother. He passed away last year. All I have are 2 photos. I want him to look at peace. Is that okay?" I replied yes. Not because I knew exactly how to do it, but because I felt like I needed to try. The photos showed a young man in his early 20s, lively eyes, a crooked smile. One of the images was blurry, the other was in profile. I spent days watching his face, trying to capture more than light and shadow, trying to understand who he was to her. When I finally sent the drawing, Alyssa responded with an emotional audio. The choked, paused voice said, "You drew the brother I remember, not the one in the photos. Thanks. Thank you, really." I cried after hearing that, not out of sadness, but out of relief. To know that finally I was fulfilling a role in the world that was not invisible, nor mechanical, nor disposable. He was human. Requests of this type began to appear more frequently. Portraits of deceased relatives, of animals that had passed away, of moments that had no record. It was as if Shed 3 was becoming a place where the past took on a new face, and people a new breath. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the workshop participants, Claire, a middle-aged librarian, approached at the end of a class and said, "Ethan, have you ever thought about writing about all this? To write? Like this? Your story. The one from Shed 3. The one from Lorraine, Lionel, the people who came by. This isn't just about art. It's about healing." The idea took me by surprise. I was never one to write. My words were in the lines, in the eyes of those portrayed, in the shadows I created on the paper. But that seed planted by Claire began to grow. I started writing down small scenes, dialogues, sensations. Not like someone who writes a book, but like someone who gathers stones to cross a river. Loose sentences, memories, smells, sounds. Little by little, I realized there was a story there. Not just mine, but all of us. Lionel was the first to know. What if I wrote about Lorraine, About Shed, I asked one afternoon, while he was arranging the paint pots. He looked at me with that way that only he had, between laughter and tears. If it's true, Ethan, then it's almost like letting her live a little longer. I started writing at night after drawing, a simple notebook, black cover, thick pages. The words came slowly but sincerely. I told how I was fired, how I received the key, how I entered the warehouse for the first time. He talked about fear, about silence, about Lionel, about Lorraine and her light that still hovered in the studio, about her portrait that now watched me while I scribbled the world. I showed the draft to Madison, my sister, and she cried when she read it. He said he could help with proofreading, formatting, even independent publishing if I wanted. The world needs this, Ethan, especially now. Meanwhile, life went on in Shed 3. The warehouse began to receive donations, art books, paints sent by former students, even old easels renovated by volunteers. It was as if the energy of that place multiplied, finding an echo in hearts that had never set foot there, but felt part of something bigger. One day, in the middle of a rainy afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Darren. Yes, that Darren. My former superior at Crossfield. Starched suit, tired face, but the same air of someone who always thought he was invincible. I heard that you're teaching art, he said, with a certain tone of incredulity. Yes, I am, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. This is beautiful, different. He looked around, touched one of the drawings on the wall. I watched him like someone looking at a specter from the past. I never imagined I had this side, he said. Neither did I for a long time. He was silent for a few seconds, then just nodded. Well, I'm glad you found something. I hope you are well. I am, I replied. For the first time in a long time, he left without saying much more. And I realized that that conversation, although brief, was a liberation. I no longer needed validation from anyone like him. I no longer needed to fit into someone else's mold. I had already found myself. And Shed 3? Well, he was more alive than ever. The following weeks passed as calmly as a river on a cloudy day, without rushing, but firmly. Shed 3 continued to pulse. The workshops continued, the requests multiplied, and the notebook where I wrote became increasingly dense, a patchwork of stories, smiles, traumas, and, above all, reunions. I started going to the city library, the same one where Claire worked. She helped me understand the process of registering a book, introduced me to independent authors, lent me titles about narrative, structure, and voice. In return, I offered coffees and quick portraits of library patrons. Within a few weeks, there was already a wall in the literature section with my drawings. Regulars started to stop there, point to their faces, smile. One man commented that it looked like a window into the city. I thought it was beautiful and fair. Lionel became ill in January, a bad flu that left him in bed for days. I visited him whenever I could. The house seemed quieter without him walking from room to room, whistling old tunes. But even lying down, he kept the sparkle in his eyes. Lorraine would be proud, he said, his voice weak. I'm just taking care of what she started, I replied. No, you're expanding. You took a flame and lit a fire. On the days that Lionel was at home, Sam took over the workshop on Saturdays. I was apprehensive at first. He wasn't a teacher, nor did he see himself as an artist. But he agreed without hesitation. He organized everything with care. At the end of the first workshop without me, he sent a message. I think we did it, Ethan. No one came out the same as they came in, including me. Little by little, I realized that Shed 3 was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone. I had turned on the light, yes, but the people had brought the heat. And then, something extraordinary happened. I got a call from an independent publisher in Portland. They had read an excerpt from my notebook posted by Claire on a community blog and wanted to talk about turning those notes into a picture book, part memoir, part essay, part visual diary. The world is hungry for real stories, Ethan, said the editor. Stories with soul. I almost refused. The old instinct to run away, to not think I was ready, returned like a shadow. But this time, I didn't give it space. I thought of Lorraine, Lionel, Alyssa, and her brother drawn with eyes of peace. I thought of myself on the cold floor of Crossfield, on the gray days of silence, and I accepted. The contract was simple. Rights maintained, total creative freedom, a generous deadline. I was asked to use my own drawings as a visual base. For the first time, my art and my words would walk together on pages that would travel beyond Flagstaff. I spent weeks immersed in the process. I chose drawings that represented landmarks. The portrait of Sam's dog, the childhood home of a lady I met years later in a coffee shop, the first doodles I made on Lorraine's easel. Each image was accompanied by a brief chronicle, a memory, a thought, a confession. I showed Lionel everything when he got better. He turned the pages calmly, his eyes teary. This is more than a book, Ethan. It's a lighthouse. When I finished the material, I sent it to the publisher. In less than a month, I received the first draft of the printed book. Matte cover, thick paper, my name on the spine, The Studio of Silence. The title was my idea, because that's what Shed 3 gave me. A place where silence finally had room to speak. We launched the book online first. Afterwards, the publisher organized a small book signing at the library. I expected half a dozen people. Almost 50 came. People from the city, former students of the workshop, children with their drawings in their hands, elderly people who just wanted a hug. Lionel, of course, was there, sitting in the front row with his eyes fixed on me, like someone watching a child cross the finish line. When the event ended, he slowly approached, picked up a copy and handed it to me. "Sign for me?" I signed with my hand shaking. "For Lionel, who saw it first." He smiled, patted my shoulder and said, "Now it's up to you to pass the key." The phrase stayed with me. That rusty key he gave me months ago wasn't just an entrance to a warehouse. It was a ticket, a right, a transfer of hope. So I decided to do something symbolic. The following Saturday at the workshop, I gathered everyone around the easel. I talked about the beginning, about Lorraine, about how that key was given to me at the moment I needed it most. And then I removed the thin chain from around my neck, where the key had hung since Lionel gave it to me, and placed it on a nail driven into the main wall of Shed 3. "That key isn't mine anymore," I said. "She's anyone who needs it, from anyone who is ready to open something that the world has closed off." That afternoon, more than ever, I understood the value of starting over, and also to let others start over. The following spring, Shed 3 bloomed like never before. The windows became brighter, the drawings pasted on the walls gained new colors, and people continued to arrive, some curious, others wounded, many in silence but all willing to touch, even if for a moment, what was so pure there. And I was someone else, whole, gift, in peace. The book, The Studio of Silence. It began to circulate at fairs, reading clubs, and even in schools. I received messages from people on the other side of the country saying that they cried when they saw the portrait of someone they didn't even know, or that they decided to take the pencil box out of the back of the closet after decades. Art, so discredited in me for years, had broken through the invisible walls of real work and reached hearts. And that, for me, was victory. Lionel stopped appearing so often, his legs hurt more, and he said he was tired, but he always called. Every Tuesday. It was a routine that turned into prayer. He once said, "You know, Ethan, there are people who go through life as visitors. You are now a resident." I understood. I lived in that space of possibilities, not just in the warehouse, but in my own story, finally assumed with all the crooked lines and unexpected colors. One Saturday morning, Claire, the librarian, brought a group of high school students. The workshop was different, noisy, lively. The young people drew freely, like people who had never been taught to doubt. One of them asked me, "Have you always been an artist?" I thought of everything. In stock at Crossfield, in the silence of dismissal, in Lionel's key, in the first shaky line on the screen. And I replied, "No, but I've always been someone trying to breathe." He smiled and went back to doodling more eagerly. That same week, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten beige envelope. It belonged to Angela, Lionel's niece, the one who bought the first drawing. She said that Lionel had been hospitalized, not in a serious condition, but as a precaution. I wanted to let you know. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "He always said you were the gift Lorraine sent late, but at the right time. I got the key to Shed 3 and went to visit him in the hospital. The room was simple, soft light coming in through the shutters. Lionel smiled when he saw me. I knew you would come. I sat next to the bed saying nothing. I was emotional. He handed me an envelope. It's not an inheritance. It's just one last seed. Inside was a paper with a name and address. Whitmore Shelter, Art for Young People, a community center for homeless teenagers in a neighboring city. They need Shed 3. Without even knowing it, you'll take it there," he said, his eyes teary but firm. I returned home with a heavy heart. The following week, I organized a visit to the shelter. I took paper, charcoal, cheap paints. I didn't expect much, but what I found there transformed me again. Boys were silent, girls were aloof, all looking at the materials as if they were forbidden to touch them. One line was enough, a dash, a gesture, and something clicked. In the following weeks, I started going every Friday. I took Sam with me, Claire, until Martha showed up. Everyone contributed in some way. Shed 3 was no longer a physical place. It was a spirit that expanded, that sprouted wherever there was space or need. Lionel recovered, but now appeared rarely. We spoke more on the phone. One day he said to me, "Ethan, remember what I said about breathing with your hand?" "Of course. You taught me that you also breathe with your heart. Thanks." A few months later, one calm morning, Lionel left. I received the news through a call from Angela. The world became a little quieter in that instant. I returned to Shed 3 alone. I opened the windows, I turned on the lights, and I drew. I drew Lionel not as a janitor, but as a giant, a man with big hands holding the world carefully, a key keeper, a messenger of new beginnings. Underneath the drawing, I wrote, "For those who saw it first." We organized a small ceremony in the warehouse. Everyone came. They brought flowers, drawings, words. I hung Lionel's portrait next to Lorraine's photo. Together, they now blessed everything that happened there. Today, 2 years after that rainy morning when I was fired and left with a box in my arms, I live a life I never dreamed of, because I never knew I had the right to dream like that. I have a routine that pulses, doesn't suffocate. A job that is not a position, is a mission. A house that breathes art, memory, and hope. Shed 3 remains standing, now with more people, more stories, more open doors. And the key is still there, hanging, waiting for someone who needs a new start, as I needed. If you have come this far with an open heart, my invitation is simple but sincere. Subscribe to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that believes in new beginnings. Here, everyone has a key. You just need to find the right door. And now I want to hear from you. What was the key that changed your life? Have you ever experienced a new beginning like this? Share in the comments. Let's build this space of exchange, welcome, and humanity together. Your voice is important. Your story also deserves to be told. See you in the next video.